But God says, hey, don't touch the man. Don't touch his life. Okay, so that's chapters 1 and 2. It's easy for us to second guess, right? And to read this because we know chapters 1 and 2. But Job doesn't. Job's friends don't. And this man Eliphaz doesn't either. And yet they're going to give what? Job counsel. Now again, a lot of the counsel, as we mentioned, is true, but it's not truth. We can state things that are true, but it's not truth in the sense that it doesn't apply maybe to that person. So I got to tell you, people, we have to be very careful. When I read this, man, I can't wait to get to the Lord. Sounds like I want to get through all this hogwash. I'm not saying Scripture is hogwash. Don't misquote me on that. But we have so much verbiage as Christians. We have a lot of verbiage. And one of the things we want to note here is this man Elihu. I mean, he has a lot of verbiage at the end here, but he's waiting. He's silent. Anybody have struggle being silent? I grew up with a lot of brothers and sisters. Their struggles being silent in our family. It's usually the biggest and the loudest speaks the most, but it's always a struggle because everybody wants to be heard. Everybody wants to make their point, right? That's kind of how it is. And we see this happen even in kind of our religious circles, right? Everybody wants to make the point. Everybody wants to be heard. And I understand that. Because oftentimes the Lord speaks through people. But oftentimes, what? He doesn't. But we say he does. This is actually what we see in these wretched, miserable comforters of Job. They're saying a lot of religious things, a lot of religious jargon, religious cliches, but they're totally missing the mark. And so God's going to come on the scene, and we're going to see next week, and he's going to rebuke them. Strong rebuke. Now, one of the interesting things we want to note here is this Elihu. He's waited for many, many, many hours, many days. All right, he hasn't said a word. It's very hard to not say a word, especially when you don't agree with somebody. Very difficult. But he holds his tongue. And it's interesting here, I'm just going to kind of give you a fast forward. When God comes on the scene and he reveals himself to Job, it's kind of interesting. He starts to question Job. But it's interesting as he does that, after he finishes all this, he tells a rebuke, or he gives a rebuke for Job's 3 friends, but he doesn't rebuke Elihu. I want you to note that. Think about why he doesn't rebuke Elihu. I'm not sure I have the answer, but it's something we can observe. He doesn't rebuke Elihu. Now, I want you to note this, chapter 32. Let's begin reading here. Elihu is, we're going to notice, much younger than these 3. And so out of respect, he's allowed these 3 Job's 3 friends to go first. But the thing is, after these 3 friends have 3 cycles through, and then Job responds to them, they really haven't answered Job's questions. Okay, so it's at this point we hear kind of like a pause. There's a pause, and there's a time of silence because God hasn't come and spoken yet. And because these 3 men are done, basically, then this man, Elihu, this young man, finds an opening for him to begin to talk. And he talks, okay? 6 chapters without stop. Okay, so we're going to go through these 6 chapters. I'm going to read through rather quickly. But one of the things I want you to note is it's a very kind of different correction of Job, okay? And there's really a lifting up of who God is. Okay, I want you to note that. There's other things to know. There's a lot of words, but really, fundamentally, you're going to see this, that basically what he's going to do is saying that we can't understand God. There's no way, even if it seems like we could. When we start to think, well, is God just for him to do this? We can't even ask that question because nobody has the mind of God. Okay? And so we're going to see Elihu kind of point to the Lord in this manner, and he's going to point to one of Job's flaws, which is pride. It's righteous pride. Because Job knows he hasn't done anything wrong. He's proven his other counselors wrong. I haven't done anything wrong. But it's in that he has pride. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit, okay? Chapter 32, verse 1 says, so these 3 men ceased answering Job because he was righteous, what? In his own eyes. You see, they couldn't prove his unrighteousness. Job, he knew he had integrity. He knew he didn't do anything wrong. But it doesn't mean that he's without fault. Doesn't mean he's without sin. Everyone has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But I want you to note this. In him proving that he hasn't done anything wrong, he has this righteousness in his own eyes. And it's in that's his downfall. This is what Elihu points to, right? I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not in any sin. But he has a religious pride to him. And this is what Elihu is going to focus on, okay? Then the wrath of Elihu, this young man, the son of Barakah, the Buzite of the family of Ram, was aroused against Job. His wrath was aroused because he justified himself rather than God. You see, he's trying to, in his righteousness, justify himself before God. Who can justify himself before God? Apart from who? Jesus Christ. No one. Right? Paul talks about that at great lengths. No one is justified before God, right? God is righteous, holy. We are what? Unrighteous, unholy. Now, what Job is talking about is that I haven't done anything wrong, but he's kind of getting it mixed up. Because he hasn't done anything wrong, he feels like he can stand before God. And this is what Elihu is going to begin to unravel. He's going to correct. No one can stand before God. He's even going to kind of reference a mediator. Without a mediator, nobody can stand before God. Okay? Now, verse 3 says, also against his 3 friends, his wrath was aroused. So not only against Job, but also against his 3 friends. He's going to bring correction to both, okay? Because they had found no answer and yet had condemned Job. All right? So they said, Job, you're doing something wrong, but they had found no answer, no solution to give to Job. I mean, talk about a wretched counselor, right? Kind of highlighting all these things, right, that are wrong, but then there's no answer, no remedy. They had no remedy. It says, now because, verse 4, they were years older than he, Elihu, had waited to speak to Job. And when Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these 3 men, his wrath was aroused. And so Elihu, the son of Barakah, the Buzite, answered and said, okay, so because he's younger, right, out of respect, he allowed these guys to blow their trumpet until they ran out of what? Air, basically, and they had no answer. And since God didn't come, right, to start to speak, then Elihu begins to speak. He says, I am young in years, and you are very old. Therefore I was afraid, and dared not declare my opinion to you. I said, age should speak, and multitude of years should teach wisdom. But there is a spirit in man, and the breath of the Almighty gives him understanding. Great men are not always wise, nor do the aged always understand justice. Now, this great men, it could be translated men of many years. Men of many years are not always wise, nor do the aged always understand justice. What is he saying here? Just because you're old like me, you're going to be wise? Just because you have gray hair, you're going to be wise? No, he's highlighting that doesn't really mean a thing. What makes you wise? There's a spirit in man, and the breath of the Almighty gives him understanding. Wow. Isn't that true? I mean, you can have a child that becomes born again and have more wisdom than somebody that's gone to church their entire life. Why? Because it's the Spirit of God that gives wisdom. Just a comment by Pastor Chuck about this. Kind of an interesting comment about young in years, he says. When God speaks to a person, age is of no account. God can speak to a young person as well as to an old person. Inspiration can come to the young as well as to the old. So Elihu was, in a sense, intimating here that his declarations were going to be inspired by God, and that such inspiration does not know age. That is so on target, right? A child can hear from God, and if a child hears from God, it's the truth, isn't it? It's going to be wisdom. It is true, God can speak to young people as well as to older people. The Bible tells us that in the last days, God will pour out his Spirit upon all flesh. Quote, your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Joel chapter 2, verse 28. So the Bible speaks about God in the latter days speaking through his young people. Isn't that interesting? Joel is prophesying what? Just before what? The coming of the Lord. You know, it's interesting. If you were to read that prophecy and take it literally, there will be a revival with the young people. Think about it. I mean, that's exciting to me. Now, I look around, I don't see a revival with the young people. Actually, I see the opposite. But maybe I don't have the eyes of faith, huh? Maybe we should be pouring into our young people, our children's ministry, right? Because can God use them? Can God speak to them? Can God give them wisdom? Well, absolutely. The Bible speaks about God in the latter days speaking through his young people, Pastor Chuck writes. Elihu here declared that, quote, the breath of the Almighty gives understanding, and that the inspiration given by God has no respect for age. I like that. You know, we should pray for our young people, our children, our children's ministry. We should pray for our youth, because God can speak to them. God will speak to them. And I think it is a sign, especially in this day, when you look at the scope of what the youth are getting into. If God would raise up a younger generation, boy, that to me is a mark that Jesus is right around the corner. Jesus is coming soon. Verse 8 again, but there is a spirit in man, and the breath of the Almighty gives him understanding. Great men are not always, or men of many years are not always wise, nor do the aged always understand justice. Therefore, verse 10, I say, listen to me. I also will declare my opinion. Indeed, I waited for your words. Out of respect, I waited for you to speak. I listened to your reasonings while you searched out what to say. I paid close attention to you, and surely not one of you convinced Job or answered his words. Lest you say, we have found wisdom, God will vanquish him, not man. Now he has not directed his words against me. So I will not answer him with your words. Verse 15, they are dismayed and answer no more. Words escape them, and I have waited because they did not speak. Okay, so there's a pause, right? Basically, Job has quieted them. These three counselors, right? They had a lot of words, right? But Job has quieted them. And, you know, the sense is this, that as Job quieted them, that Job is feeling a little bit prideful, right? And this is what Elihu is going to address. What's the proverb? Pride before what? Before the fall, right? Now, again, pride is a very tricky thing. And I think it's very tricky for those of us who are religious pride. When we think that, you know, I'm not in sin, I'm not doing anything wrong, right? That's exactly what Job is, that's his place. But this is what Elihu fingers, that's your problem. It's religious pride. Now, there's debates on whether Elihu is really bringing wisdom from God or not. And so you can measure that out. But it's interesting, he is not rebuked by God when God comes on the scene. And Job doesn't respond to Elihu. We don't have a record of that. And so people like J. Vernon McGee, if you read his commentary, the Bible Knowledge Commentary, and even Pastor Chuck, they will allude to this, that he had nothing to say, Job, in response. Okay, but there's a little bit of a debate. But one of the things you're going to note here, that Elihu points to his religious pride. Just because he's not in sin, just because he's not doing anything wrong, does that make you right before God? No, it doesn't. You know what? You're the same wretched sinner just as anybody else. Apart from Christ, you're going down. You understand? And this is what Elihu is going to kind of allude to here. Okay? Because they stood still and answered no more, I also will answer my part. I too will declare my opinion, for I am full of words. And we're going to see this 6 chapters worth. The spirit within me compels me. Indeed, my belly is like wine that has no vent. Verse 19. It is ready to burst like new wineskins. I will speak that I may find relief. I must open my lips and answer. Boy, it's been really hard to kind of not say anything. You ever have that, right? Boy, you just let your older brothers and sisters go on and on and on and on. You say, hey man, these guys, this is what I think all the time, right? But being the youngest, yeah, you don't have much to say. That's what happens. This is what he's saying. I'm the youngest here. Man, I've been sitting here for days wanting to say something, but I just held my tongue. But now it's all going to come out. I will speak that I may find relief. I must open my lips and answer. Let me not, I pray, show partiality to anyone, nor let me flatter any man, for I do not know how to flatter, else my Maker would soon take me away. And so He's going to correct Job, but he's also going to correct Job's 3 friends. Now, this is the youngest of the whole bunch here, okay? So think about it. It'd be like maybe a man in his 20s, right, mid-20s, correcting people that are my age, 50s, 60s, 70s. Let me ask you this. Would you ever receive correction from somebody that young? Those of us who are humble, don't have religious pride. If I had somebody in his mid-20s saying, hey, Pastor, you got it wrong, would I ever receive it? Oh, heavens not. I would never receive it from a young man. You know why? Because of my pride. You understand? This is what he's presenting here. Have you ever been corrected by somebody you didn't want to be corrected by? And you get really upset? See, this is what's happening. This man Elihu is going to correct not only Job, but his 3 friends. Verse 1, chapter 33. But please, Job, hear my speech, and listen to all my words. Now I open my mouth, my tongue speaks in my mouth, my words come from my upright heart. My lips utter pure knowledge. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. If you can answer me, set your words in order before me. Take your stand. Truly I am as your spokesman before God. I also have been formed out of clay. Surely no fear of me will terrify you, nor will my hand be heavy on you. Surely you have spoken in my hearing, and I have heard the sound of your words, saying, I am pure, without transgression. I am innocent, and there is no iniquity. This is what Job has said, right? I'm pure, I'm innocent. Yet he, notice the capital H, he, God finds occasions against me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks. He watches all my paths. Look in this, you are not righteous. See, by you saying this, Elihu was saying that you are not righteous, by you just merely saying this. Look in this, you are not righteous. I will answer you, for God is greater than man. You know, for me to go before God and says, hey, you know, I'm righteous, that is a great mistake. Isn't it? Now, we can say we're righteous in Jesus Christ on this side of the cross. That's true. But right here, for him to say, you know, I'm righteous. God, why are you doing this? I'm righteous. What Eli was saying, that's a great mistake. It's a grave mistake. Look in this, you are not righteous, he says. I will answer you. For God is greater than man. There's no way you can fathom God's righteousness. For you to do kind of a compare and contrast between your righteousness and God's righteousness, it's not happening. For God is greater than man. Why do you contend with him? For he does not give an accounting of any of his words. For God may speak in one way or in another, yet man does not perceive it. I like this word perceive. You see what he's saying is that man cannot perceive the mind of God. Not the fullness. Remember, it reminds me of this. Remember John chapter 3? You've heard me talk about this over again. Remember Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night? Unless a man be born again, he says it not once but twice. The second time he says, unless a man be born again, he cannot enter the kingdom. Now, this is what we're looking for. We want to enter the kingdom, right? But the first time, does he say that? He says, no. Unless a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom. What does that mean? If you look at that word, it means you cannot perceive the things of God. See, unless you have the Spirit of God in you, you cannot perceive the things of God. You cannot understand God unless you're born of the Spirit. That's what Jesus is telling Nicodemus. Hey, you're a teacher of the Pharisees. You're the head, right? You're the best teacher in the Sanhedrin, Nicodemus. But you cannot understand the things of God unless you're born of the Spirit. This is what Elihu was saying. Yet man does not perceive God. You can't unless you were born of God. In a dream, in a vision of the night, verse 15, when deep sleep falls upon men while slumbering on their beds, when he opens the ears of men and seals their instruction in order to turn man from his deed and conceal, what? Pride from man. Notice he's bringing what? Pride. I want to read you another comment. This is another one by Pastor Chuck on this verse here. Let's see if I can find this one. 33. 17. Yeah. Corrective calamities, he writes. Now he's highlighting pride. In order to turn man from his deed and conceal pride from man, he keeps back his soul from the pit and his life from perishing by the sword. Pastor Chuck writes, Elihu suggested that God does not always punish a person in judgment, but that often God uses calamity as a reproof to turn one back in the right path. That when children of God are going astray, often God will bring things into their lives that will stop them and cause them to turn from the path of destruction. That the judgments of God are corrective rather than punitive. Does that make sense? That oftentimes God allows what seems like judgment to come upon is to correct you, is to curb you from your ways, rather than just judging, like a punitive, like throwing you in jail type of thing. Right? It's to turn you before you go into jail. This is closer to the truth, Pastor Chuck writes. The Bible tells us that, quote, whom the Lord loves, he chastens. So oftentimes we go through these great trials because the Lord is chastening us. He wants to spare us from actual judgment. It is true that when we begin to walk a path that is opposed to the ways of God, God will sometimes allow calamity to come to turn us back to the right path. Oftentimes God uses pain or suffering in our lives in a corrective way to turn us back to him. Now, what Pastor Chuck is really alluding to in verses 16 and 17 here is that Job does not understand that. Maybe the Lord is allowing this to happen is to curb your pride. You see, that's how we're wired, right? I'm not in sin. I'm doing everything right. We don't expect any kind of what? Calamity, do we? And so this is exactly what Elihu was saying. That because of the spiritual pride, perhaps the Lord is allowing this to humble you. Now, is he humbled? Well, it would seem not. In one sense, he's humble. It would seem not, right? He's just proven his three friends, I'm righteous. Verse 18, he keeps back his soul from the pit and his life from perishing by the sword. Man is also chastened, verse 19, with pain on his bed and with strong pain in many of his bones. Verse 20, so that his life abhors bread and his soul succulent food. His flesh wastes away from sight and his bones stick out, which once were not seen. Yes, his soul draws near the pit and his life to the executioners. Verse 23, if there is a messenger for him, a mediator. I want you to note that, mark that. A mediator, one among 1,000 to show man his uprightness. Who would that mediator be for us? It would be Jesus, huh? That's who it would be. And so it's kind of interesting, Elihu is kind of inference. If there would be a mediator, then things might be okay. But there's not. So there's no way you can know the mind and the heart and perceive the way of God. You're just going to have to trust him. See, he says, if there is a messenger for him, a mediator, one among 1,000 to show man his uprightness, then he is gracious to him and says, deliver him from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom. Isn't that what Jesus did? He was our ransom, wasn't he? It's kind of interesting that this is all the way back here in the book of Job. See, Elihu is reasoning this out. It's kind of like what Paul explained in Galatians, right? The law was a tutor pointing us to what? A mediator, Christ. There's no way you can get to righteousness. There needs to be a mediator. This is what he's kind of inferring. It's kind of interesting to kind of piece this together. He's figured it out, Elihu, huh? There's no way you can understand the mind of God unless you have the Spirit of God. But the only way you can do that is you're going to have a mediator that mediates righteousness to you. Verse 25, his flesh shall be young like a child's. He shall return to the days of his youth. He shall pray to God, and he will delight in him. He shall see his face with joy, for he restores to man his righteousness. And then he looks at man and says, I have sinned and perverted what was right, and it did not profit me. He will redeem his soul from the going down to the pit, and his life shall see the light. Behold, God works all these things, twice in fact, 3 times with a man, to bring back his soul from the pit, that he may be enlightened with the light of life. Give ear, Job. Listen to me. Hold your peace, and I will speak. If you have anything to say, answer me. Speak, for I desire to justify you. If not, listen to me. Hold your peace, and I will teach you wisdom. Now, it's interesting. Job does not respond to him. Now, there's different, if you read different commentaries, they have different takes on Elihu. I would tend to agree with the commentators I read, right? McGee, Pastor Chuck, and then also the Bible Knowledge commentary, that Elihu is really bringing the closest wisdom to God here. And there's a lot of different reasons. God doesn't rebuke him, and Job remains silent. He doesn't have a response to it, okay? Because perhaps Elihu has touched his fault, spiritual pride. Anybody have spiritual pride in here? It's usually the ones that say they're without sin. It's just like Job, isn't it? He's without sin, but he has spiritual pride. And this is what Elihu is putting his finger on. Chapter 34, verse 1. Elihu further answered and said, hear my words, you wise men. Okay, so now he's referring to Job's three friends. Hear my words, you wise men. Give ear to me, you who have knowledge. For the ear tests words as the palate tastes food. Let us choose justice for ourselves. Let us know among ourselves what is good. For Job has said, I am righteous, but God has taken away my justice. Should I lie concerning my right? My wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. What man is like Job? Job is a righteous man, right? He really has integrity. Who goes in the company with the workers of iniquity and walks with wicked men? For he has said, it profits a man nothing, that he should delight in God. Verse 10, therefore listen to me, you men of understanding, you wise men, you older men here. Far be it from God to do wickedness. You see what he's saying is that Job said he was righteous, right? And so if we take him at his word, far be it from God to do wickedness. Your reasoning is flawed. The reasoning was this, that God only what? Only judges the wicked. And what he's saying, no, your reasoning is far be it from God to do wickedness. Right? But they're saying, see, if Job really is innocent, which Elihu believes, or innocent in the sense that he hasn't done anything wrong, he's not in sin, then God has done wickedly. You see what he's saying, the logic you're presenting here is that God only blesses those who are doing good, and God only does bad things to those who are wicked. But let's assume that Job is not doing anything wrong. He says your logic is flawed. Far be it from God to do wickedness. There's no way God would ever do wickedness. And from the Almighty to commit iniquity. Verse 11. For he repays man according to his work, and makes man to find a reward according to his ways. Surely God will never do wickedly, nor will the Almighty pervert justice. Who gave him charge over the earth, or who appointed him over the whole world? If he should set his heart on it, if he should gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would perish together, and man would return to dust. Verse 16, if you have understanding, hear this. Listen to the sound of my words. Should one who hates justice govern? Will you condemn him who is most just? Is it fitting to say to a king, you are worthless, and to nobles you are wicked? Verse 19, yet he is not partial to princes, nor does he regard the rich more than the poor, for they are all the work of his hands. Verse 20, in a moment they die, and in the middle of the night the people are shaken and pass away. The mighty are taken away without a hand. Verse 21, for his eyes are on the ways of man, and he sees all his steps. There is no darkness nor shadow of death, where the workers of iniquity may hide themselves, for he need not further consider a man, that he should go before God in judgment. He breaks in pieces mighty men without inquiry, and sets others in their place. Therefore he knows their works. He overthrows them in the night, and they are crushed. He strikes them as wicked men, in the open slight of others, because they turn back from him, and would not consider any of his ways, so that they caused the cry of the poor to come to him, for he hears the cry of the afflicted. And when he gives quietness, who then can make trouble? And when he hides his face, who then can see him? Whether it is against the nation or man alone, that the hypocrite should not reign, lest the people be snared. For has anyone said to God, I have borne chastening? I will offend no more. Teach me what I do not see. If I have done iniquity, I will do no more. Should he repay it according to your terms? According to your understanding? You see what he's getting at here? Does the world work according to how you understand it? No. It's how God understands it. Should he repay it according to your terms? Does just because you disavow it? You must choose and not I. Therefore speak what you know. Men of understanding say to me, wise men who listen to me. Job speaks without knowledge. His words are without wisdom. Oh, that Job were tried to the utmost, because his answers are like those of wicked men. For he adds rebellion to his sin. He claps his hands among us and multiplies his words against God. What basic Elihu is saying to these three wise men here, Job's friend, is that you totally lack understanding. You have words. Maybe in the parts there's true sayings in those words, but there's not truth that's coming out. That basically you've missed the mark because you don't know the mind of God. All right, chapter 35, verse 1. Moreover, Elihu answered and said, do you think this is right? Do you say my righteousness is more than God's? For you say, what advantage will it be to you? What profit shall I have more than if I had sinned? I will answer you, and your companions with you. Look to the heavens and see, and behold the clouds, they are higher than you. If you sin, what do you accomplish against him? Or if your transgressions are multiplied, what do you do to him? If you are righteous, what do you give him? Or what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness affects a man such as you, and your righteousness a son of man. Because of the multitude of oppressions they cry out. They cry out for help because of the arm of the mighty. But no one says, where is God my maker? Who gives songs in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth, and makes us wiser than the birds of heaven. There they cry out, but he does not answer, because the pride of evil men. Surely God will not listen to empty talk, nor will the Almighty regard it. Although you say you do not see him, yet justice is before him, and you must wait for him. And now because he has not punished in his anger, nor taken much notice of folly, therefore Job opens his mouth in vain. He multiplies words without knowledge. I wanted to make a point. Oh, I forgot to make this point before we go on to chapter 36. Notice in chapter 32, I'm sorry, but I think there's an important point here. Chapter 32, notice in verse 16, 17, 18, 19, and actually all in chapter 32. Now this is Elihu writing, right? Notice he says, and I waited because they did not speak, because they stood still. I also will answer my part. I too will declare my opinion, for I am full of words. The spirit within me compels me. Indeed, my belly is like wine. Notice he's speaking in the first person. Okay, so J. Vernon McGee says that this could possibly be pointing to Elihu who wrote this book. Think about it. Because he's writing in the first person here. Very interesting. Interesting observation. It says it can't be full proof on that, but it could indicate that Elihu is the one that's writing this book of Job. Very interesting. And that's why he's the one that precedes right before God comes on the scene. And that's why we see the order here. Okay, so with that, let's continue reading chapter 36. I forgot to mention that. Elihu also proceeded and said, bear with me a little, and I will show you that there are yet words to speak on God's behalf. I will fetch my knowledge from afar. I will ascribe righteousness to my Maker. For truly my words are not false. One who is perfect in knowledge is with you. I am speaking, right? He's saying the wisdom of God here. Behold, God is mighty, but despises no one. He is mighty in strength of understanding. He does not preserve the life of the wicked, but gives justice to the oppressed. He does not withdraw his eyes from the righteous, but they are on the throne with kings, for he has seated them forever. And they are exalted, and they are bound in fetters, held in the cords of affliction. Verse 9, and then he tells them their work and their transgressions, that they have acted defiantly. He also opens their ear to instruction and commands that they turn from iniquity. If they obey and serve him, they shall spend their days in prosperity and their years in pleasures. Verse 12, but if they do not obey, they shall perish by the sword, and they shall die without knowledge. But the hypocrites in heart store up wrath. They do not cry for help when he binds them. They die in youth, and their life ends among the perverted persons. He delivers the poor in their affliction and opens their ears in oppression. Indeed, he would have brought you out of dire distress into a broad place where there is no restraint. And what is set on your table would be full of richness. But you are filled with the judgment due the wicked. Judgment and justice take hold of you, because there is wrath. Beware lest he take you away with one blow. For a large ransom would not help you avoid it. Verse 19. Will your riches or all the mighty forces keep you from distress? Do not desire the night when people are cut off in their place. Take heed, do not turn to iniquity. For you have chosen this rather than affliction. Behold, God is exalted by his power. Who teaches like him? Who has assigned him his way? Or who has said, you have done wrong? You see, what he's emphasizing is God is good and God is just, right? Who are we to question him? You see, he's going right into, and we're going to see this next week. This is what God is going to say to Job. Who are you to question me? Right? And so this is where he's going. He's kind of starting to lift up God here, and he's saying that there's no way we can understand. There's no way we can even question God. This is what Job is doing, right? Why is this happening to me? Right? Why is not justice being served? Well, who are we to ask what justice is to God? And so he says, behold, God is exalted by his power. Who teaches like him? Who has assigned him his way? Who has said, you have done wrong? Verse 24. Remember to magnify his work of which men have sung. Everyone has seen it. Man looks on it from afar. Behold, God is great, and we do not know him. Nor can the number of his years be discovered. For he draws up drops of water which distill as rain from the mist, which the clouds drop down and pour abundantly on man. Indeed, can anyone understand the spreading of the clouds? The thunder from his canopy? Look, he scatters his light upon it and covers the depth of the sea. For by these he judges the peoples. He gives food in abundance. He covers his hands with lightning and commands it to strike. His thunder declares it, and the cattle also concerning the rising storm. Verse 1, chapter 37. At this also my heart trembles and leaps from its place. Hear attentively the thunder of his voice. Notice he's all focusing on God. This is really how God comes on the scene as well. Job, do you understand all this? And the rumbling that comes from his mouth. He sends it forth under the whole heaven, his lightning to the ends of the earth, and a voice roars. He thunders with his majestic voice, and he does not restrain them when his voice is heard. God thunders marvelously with his voice. He does great things which we cannot comprehend. For he says to the snow, fall on the earth, likewise to the gentle rain, and the heavy rain of his strength. He seals the hand of every man, that all men may know his work. The beasts go into dens and remain in their lairs. You think Job can explain this? No, he can't, can he? You see what he's doing. He's bringing things to Job's attention. There's no way we can understand all the ways of God. The beasts go into dens and remain in their lairs. From the chamber of the south comes the whirlwind, and cold from the scattering winds of the north. By the breath of God ice is given, and the broad waters are frozen. Also with moisture he saturates the thick clouds. He scatters his bright clouds, and they swirl about, being turned by his guidance, that they may do whatever he commands them on the face of the whole earth. He causes it to come, whether for correction or for his hand or for mercy. Listen to this, O Job. Stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. Do you know when God dispatches them and causes the light of his cloud to shine? Do you know that, Job? Do you know how the clouds are balanced? Those wondrous works of him who is perfect in knowledge. Why are your garments hot? When he quiets the earth by the south wind. With him have you spread out the skies, strong as a cast metal mirror? Teach us what we should say to him, for we can prepare nothing because of the darkness. Should he be told what I wish to speak? If a man were to speak, surely he would be swallowed up. Even now men cannot look at the light when it is bright in the skies. When the wind has passed and cleared them, he comes from the north as golden splendor, with God as awesome majesty. As for the Almighty, we cannot find him. He is excellent in power, in judgment and abundant justice. He does not oppress, therefore men fear him. He shows no partiality to any who are wise of heart. Okay, so this is the end of Elihu. Notice how it ends. It crescendos up to who? God. Basically, he's kind of, we're going to read this next week in chapter 38, it's kind of leading up to what God says. Can you know God? Can you know why he does things? The reasoning? Can you answer when God questions you? Well, we can't. And so for us to approach God and to question God and say, why are you doing this? Or why should you do this? What Elihu is saying, that it's total nonsense. And this is indeed what God is going to say when he comes on the scene, as we see, chapter 38. Okay, so the best is saved for the last, okay? Next week, you got to come back. This is what God finally now says, okay? All right, so there's a lot of man's verbiage, right? What's important is what not. What man says, knows what God says. Chapter 38, okay? All right, we'll come back next week. Let's pray, Lord. We thank you for your word tonight. Covered a lot of ground. A lot of words, Lord. Kind of speaks to me about the words of man. There's a lot of words. But Lord, we want to hear just your word. Sometimes it's, even in the silence, Lord, we can hear. We can sense your pulse, Lord. Your spirit, Lord. Just even in the silence where there's no words spoken, but just by your Spirit, you speak to our hearts, Lord. And I pray, Lord, we have that discernment, Lord. Oh, Lord, that we would be slow to speak and just quick to listen and hear. And so, Lord, I pray your blessing over each one this night. May you teach us by your Spirit, Lord, truly how to pray and how to counsel, Lord. How to counsel through just the truth of the word. How to be prayer warriors first, Lord. To perhaps just be in silence, seeking you, praying before we ever speak. And so, Lord, may you give us wisdom from on high. May you, by your Spirit, give us perception into the things of God. Oh, Lord, that we might not only grow, but that we might be able to build each other up, Lord, in that knowledge. I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Shall we stand? Next week, you know God's going to answer them? 83 questions. God's going to ask Job 83 questions. And you know what? Job's not going to have any answers. Not interesting. For thou, O Lord, art high above all the earth. Thou art exalted far above all gods. For thou, O Lord, art high above all the earth. Thou art exalted far above all gods. We exalt thee, we exalt thee, we exalt thee, O Lord. We exalt thee, we exalt thee, we exalt thee, O Lord. All right, God bless you.
Thank you, the Father's